welcome everyone for reading Prabhupada Lilamrt. So we are continuing the chapter 22, and we'll start also chapter 23 today. Any comments, reflections from yesterday? So it is a funny thing, right? We'll end it with Steve and Prabhupada's conversation. Steve was inclined, he wanted to serve, he wanted to take the initiation, he likes everything, but he was concerned, why should I cut the hair? Why should I cut hair? Krishna has, Rama has, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has, why should I cut? Prabhupada said, because you're following me. I don't have hair, so he should also. That's why AJ was happy that Steve can argue, I can also argue, right? Okay, you should cut the back. So anyway, he agreed, he cut the face, shaved the face, beard and mustache, and you should cut the back also. Steve agreed. To Steve, Prabhupada gave the name Subala and to Carolyn the name Krishna Devi. A few days later, he performed their wedding. Since each ceremony was another occasion for kirtan and prasadam distribution, onlookers became attracted. And as the spiritual names and married couples increased with each ceremony, Prabhupada's spiritual family grew. The harmonious atmosphere was like that of a small, loving family. And Prabhupada dealt with his disciples intimately, without the formalities of an institution or hierarchy. Disciples would approach him for various reasons, entering the little apartment to be alone with him as he sat on a mat before his makeshift desk in the morning sunlight. With men like Mukunda Gurudas and Syam Sundar, Swamiji was a friend. With Janaki and Govindadasi, he was sometimes ready to be chided, almost like their naughty son. Or he would be their grandfatherly teacher of cooking, the enforcer of the rules of kitchen cleanliness. And to all of them, he was the unfathomable pure devotee of Lord Krishna, who knew the conclusions of all the Vedic scriptures and who knew beyond all doubts the truth of transmigration. He could answer all questions. He could lead them beyond material life, beyond height Asbury, hippiedom, and into the spiritual world with Krishna. It was 7 p.m. Srila Prabhupada entered the temple dressed in a saffron dhoti, an old turtleneck jersey under a cardigan sweater, and a chadar around his shoulders. Walking on the dais in the rear of the room, he took his seat. The dais, a cushion atop, a redwood plank 2 feet off the floor, was supported between two redwood columns. In front of the dais stood a cloth-covered lectern with a bucket of cut flowers on either side. Covering the wall behind the dais was a typical Indian madras with Haridas' crude painting of Lord Chaitanya in kirtan hanging against it. Srila Prabhupada picked up his kartals, wrapped the cloth straps around his forefingers, and looked out at his young followers sitting cross-legged on the burgundy rug. The men were bearded, and almost everyone wore long hair, beads, exotic clothing, and trinkets. The bulbs hanging from the ceiling diffused their light through Japanese paper lanterns, and Navajo, God's eye symbols, dangled from strings. Prabhupada began the ringing of 1, 2, 3 rhythm, and Syam Sundar began pumping the harmonium. Although the harmonium was a simple instrument, a miniature piano keyboard to be played with the right hand and a bellows to be pumped with the left hand, no one in the Frederick Street store knew how to play it. So it became simply the drum. Another important kirtan instrument, the two-headed mridanga from India, was meant for intricate rhythmic accompaniments. But even Mukunda could play it only very simply, matching the 1, 2, 3 apropos kartas. So here now, as handful of devotees are increasing here, initiated devotees are increasing here, and Prabhupada has a very intimate relationship with all of them. Even though he's from the spiritual world, pure devotee, he was a guru, but still, his dealings with them was a little different. They were, did I read it right? They were like a friend. With Mukunda God, there was like a friend, yes. And with Govinda Dasi, Janaki, and sometimes ready to be chided. Almost like their naughty son. So interesting. And he like grandfatherly teacher of cooking. So they had a very intimate relation. They had a lot of trust on Prabhupada. He could answer everything. Now it's narrates the evening, 7 p.m. Prabhupada sat on his dais with saffron dhoti. How the dais looked like, a little more description is here. And looks like one instrument. Prabhupada brought one drum from India. I didn't hear that narration. I hope I didn't miss it. But here I see that it's mentioning that the drum mridanga came from India, right? Or drum. So devotees don't know how to play. At least they're managing here. AJ, please go ahead.
There were other instruments on hand: a kettle drum, the pride of the temple, Hayagriva's old cornet, a few conch shells, and a horn Hayagriva had made by shellacking a piece of kelp he had found on the beach. Some guests had brought their own flutes, pipes, and bongos, but for now they let their instruments remain still and clapped to Prabhupada's rhythm as he sang the evening prayers. Prabhupada's Sanskrit hymn praised the Vaishnava spiritual masters. For each great devotee in the disciplic succession, he sang a specific prayer. First, he chanted the poetic description of the transcendental qualities of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, then Gorakishore Das Babaji, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, one after another. One prayer describes Srila Bhaktisiddhanta as the deliverer of the fallen souls, and another praised Gorakishore Das Babaji as renunciation personified, always merged in the feelings of separation and intense love for Krishna. Srila Prabhupada sang of Lord Chaitanya, the golden complexioned Supreme Personality of Godhead who distributed pure love of Krishna. And he sang of Lord Krishna, the ocean of mercy, the friend of the distressed, the source of creation. As Prabhupada became absorbed in the bhajan, his body trembled with ecstatic emotion. The group on the floor sat swaying from side to side, watching him, his eyes closed in meditation, his delicate, practiced fingers expertly playing the cymbals. They heard the heartfelt minor moods and tones of his voice, unlike anything they had heard before. Then he began the familiar mantra they had come to hear, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. And immediately they joined him. The horns and the drums sounded, and soon all the other instrument players joined in. Gradually, a few at a time, members of the audience rose to their feet and began to dance. Prabhupada's followers stood and began stepping from side to side as he had shown them, sometimes raising their hands in the air. Others moved as they pleased, occasionally opening his eyes and glancing around. Prabhupada sat firmly chanting, though his head and body were trembling. So, yeah, it's just kind of talking about how the kirtan would start. So they had, multiple instruments on hand, and a lot of folks brought their own. I'd be curious to see what the horn Hayagriva made out of seaweed looks like. But so Prabhupada began with the Vaishnava prayers, the prayers to the spiritual masters, and went through, all the devotees in the disciplic succession and sang their praises. And it recaps, kind of the details around that. And then once he finished that portion of the kirtan, he began the Maha Mantra, and everybody joined in. People were playing the instruments that they brought. People got up and started dancing, and Prabhupada's disciples were also dancing as well, doing the Swami step. And he just kind of sat there and would occasionally open his eyes and look around and just continued to chant and even though they said he was trembling while he did it. So
Yeah, he was deep in ecstasy. So I think everybody started dancing also. Yeah. Who is the one I forgot? Who was Mukunda Gurudas, and who else was like a friend?
Shyam Sundar.
Sundar was a friend. Okay, I didn't know. Because Sundar Prabhu says that he was rarely used to meet Prabhupada. He was always background. Read.
Prabhupada's
No,
Sanskrit. After 20 minutes, many of the young dancers were leaping, jumping, and perspiring as Prabhupada continued to sing, leading the dancers by the beat of his kartals. His eyes were closed, yet he controlled the entire wild congregation, playing his kartals loudly. The chanting and dancing continued, and Prabhupada approved. The kirtan of these hippies was different from the chanting of Indian Brahmanas. But Prabhupada did not mind. His standard was devotion. In his Radha Krishna temple, whatever he accepted, Krishna accepted. This was his offering to Krishna through his spiritual master, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. Prabhupada was absolutely confident. Even if his young devotees did not know how to play the harmonium, keyboard, or the mridanga, even if they did not know that congregation kirtan should be done not in constant unison as they were doing, but responsibly, and even if they did not know how to honor the Guru. Still, because they were chanting and dancing, he encouraged them and nodded to them, yes. Wild elements were there, of course, people whose minds and intentions were far away in some chemically induced fantasy, yet the mood was dominated by Srila Prabhupada's followers, who danced with arms upraised and watched their leader carefully. Although in many ways they were still like hippies, they were Swamiji's disciples, and they wanted to please him and follow his instruction. They wanted to attain Krishna consciousness for all the varied punctuation of horns and timpani. The kirtana remained sweet. Hayagriva even played his cornet in tune and only during every other mantra.
Okay, so as the dance began after 20 minutes, they all were leaping, jumping, and perspiring um, very nicely. Now, here is the thing, and Prabhupada being a very advanced devotee, he was associating with all the sincere devotees, and their chanting and their hearing is totally different. Now Prabhupada is ended up in a foreign country where people have no idea, no concept. But still Prabhupada didn't mind. He did very patiently tolerating. People don't know how to respect. They didn't realize, they don't know how to honor a guru. So still Prabhupada didn't mind. They didn't know how to chant properly in unison. He didn't chant and responsibly. He didn't mind. And all this way, but only he had a faith. He had a strong faith on the Lord. Um, so that's a very patiently was really well-wisher. Very patiently was going through all these things. Now, they were simply following Prabhupada, all the many ways. They were still like hippies. They were Swami's disciples and they wanted to please him and follow his instructions. They wanted to attain Krishna consciousness. For all the varied punctuations, horns and timpani, Kirtana remained sweet. Hayagriva even played his cornet in tune and only during every other mantra. Hayagriva. Yeah. Second proof.
Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada knew that some aspects of the kirtan were wrong or below standard, but he accepted the offering, and not awkwardly but lovingly. He simply wanted these American boys and girls to chant, that they dressed irregularly, jumped too savagely, or had the wrong philosophy did not over-concern him. These boys and girls were chanting Hare Krishna, so at least for the present they were pure. The hippies knew that too, and they loved it. Just as in Janaki's dream, Srila Prabhupada's pleasure was to see the whole world engaged in Kirtan. Somehow or other, he would say, people should be engaged in Krishna consciousness. And this was the instruction of Lord Chaitanya's chief follower, Rupa Goswami, who had written, Tasmat kenapi upayena manaha Krishne niveshayet. Somehow or other, fix the mind on Krishna. The rules and regulations can come later. Inherent in this attitude of Srila Prabhupada's and Srila Rupa Goswami's was a strong conviction about the purifying force of the holy name. If engaged in chanting Hare Krishna, even the most fallen person could gradually become a saintly devotee. Srila Prabhupada would often quote a verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam affirming that persons addicted to sinful acts could be purified by taking shelters of the devotees of the Lord. He knew that every Haight-Ashbury hippie was eligible to receive the mercy of the holy name, and he saw it as his duty to his spiritual master to distribute the gift of Krishna consciousness freely, rejecting no one. Yet, while living amongst these melachas, he required a certain standard of behavior, and he was adamant about preserving the purity of his Krishna conscious society. For example, if we were going to distribute free food to the public, it could not be ordinary food, but must be prasadam, food offered to Krishna. Feeding hungry people was futile unless they were given prasadam and a chance of liberation from birth and death. And although in the kirtans he allowed openness and free expression and welcomed the wildest participation, the transcendental sound of the holy name had to dominate. He never allowed the kirtan to degenerate into a mere beating on drums or chanting of any old words. Nor could anyone in the group become so crazy that others wouldn't be able to hear or take part in congregational chanting. So here, basically, even Prabhupada knew that the kirtan, some aspects of the kirtan were not up to standard, but he still loved what the American boys and girls were doing. They probably did not have the correct philosophy, or they did not dress properly, or they were like jumping like jumpingly very high, but for that moment they were all chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra and they were pure. Prabhupada also wanted to follow the instruction of Rupa Goswami that we need to have everyone follow Krishna consciousness, focus their mind on Krishna, and the rules and regulations can come later on. And with this attitude, basically, it is also said in the Srimad Bhagavatam, confirmed in the Srimad Bhagavatam, that persons who were like the most fallen with all these sinful activities, they could be purified by taking the shelter of a pure devotee of the Lord. And with that in mind and following his spiritual master, he would distribute the gift of Krishna consciousness to all the hippies who had come to him. And even though he would give it freely, he would still make sure that they were following those 4 regulative principles. An example given here is whenever they were going to distribute food, Prabhupada wanted to ensure that it was always prasadam, which was offered to the god, and then be taken out for food distribution. And he also didn't want to anyone to chant loudly so that others would not hear, or he didn't want the drums or the kartal, overtake the overall chanting.
Nipa?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
In his attempts to somehow or other get these young people chanting Hare Krishna, Prabhupada instinctively knew what to allow and what not to allow. He was the master and his disciples followed him when he permitted an egoistic sensual dancer to jump around the temple or drugged madman to argue with him in a question and answer period. When a person was too disruptive, Prabhupada was not afraid to stop him. But stopping was rare. The main thing was giving. The kirtana lasted more than an hour, as the chanters joined hands and danced around the room and incense poured out the front door. The morning and evening kirtanas had already made the Radha Krishna temple popular in Ashbury, but when the devotees began serving a daily free lunch, the temple became an integral part of the community. Prabhupada told his disciples simply to cook and distribute prasadam. That would be their only activity during the day. In the morning, they would cook, and at noon, they would feed everyone who came, sometimes 150 to 200 hippies from the street of Heshbari. Before the morning kirtana, the girls would put oatmeal on the stove, and by breakfast, there would be a room full of hippies, most of whom had been up all night. The cereal and fruit was for some the first solid food, some first solid food in days. But the main program was the lunch. Maluti, who would go out and shop, getting donations whenever possible for whole wheat flour, garbanzo flour, split peas, rice, and whatever vegetables were cheap or free. Potatoes, carrots, turnips, rutabagas, beets. Then every day the cook would prepare spiced mashed potatoes, buttered chapati, split pea dal, and a vegetable dish for 200 people. The lunch program was possible because many merchants were willing to donate the recognized course of feeding hippies.
Hmm.
So, here it describes like in the attempt to get people, young people, to chant the Hare Krishna mantra, Prabhupada knew what to allow, what not to, and he was the master, and his new disciples were when he permitted, followed him when he permitted, so they followed him when he allowed an egoistic sensual dancer to jump around the temple, and to argue with him in a or a drug madman to argue in a question answer period. When a Prabhupada was not afraid to stop such a disruptive person, but stopping was rare and giving was more. Kirtana always lasted for more than an hour, as the chanters also joined and the incense were poured. Uh, Morning and evening kirtanas had made Radha Krishna popular in Heshbari, and when devotees started to serve free lunch, the temple would become like an integral part, and it would be cooked and distributed as prasadam, as Prabhupada had already instructed. There would be activity during the day. In the morning they would cook, and in the evening they would feed, and the people hippies who came around were like 150 to 200 from Height Hashbury Street. Before the kirtana, the girls would normally put an oatmeal for the breakfast, and the room would be full with the hippies, and most of would stay till the night. The cereal and fruit was some of the solid foods which were uh, served in the days. And Malti would go out and shop, getting donations wherever possible. And she would go shop mainly wheat flour, garbanzo flour, and some things which were like cheap vegetables, potatoes. And every day cooks would prepare spiced mashed potatoes, chapatis, vegetable, and pea dals, which were served to 200 people. The lunch program was possible because many merchants were willing to donate. Uh, to the recognized cause of feeding hippies.
Feeding hippies, interesting. How wonderful service they have done. That's why they're still glorious in the movement because of their contribution. For all of information, Mother Malti still lives in New Vrindavan. If you all are okay, we can invite her online to give some class someday. Or we can invite Syam Sundar Prabhu. Or we might ask Mukunda Goswami also if he can come. Just letting you know.
That would be great.
Yes, that'll be nice. We will. Who else is there? Prasanti, please read. Jeremy, welcome for reading program. Thank you so much for joining. Prasanti, you please read.
Harsa Rani, the lunch program, attracted a lot of hippie hill crowd who obviously wanted food. They were really hungry. And there were other people who would come also. People who were working with the temple but weren't initiated. The record player would be playing the Swamiji's record. It was a nice family atmosphere. Haridasa. It was taken outside too, outside the front, but the main food was served inside. It was amazing. The people would just all huddle together, and we would really line them wall to wall. A lot of them would simply eat and leave. Other stores along Haight Ashbury were selling everything from beads to rock records. But our store was different because we weren't selling anything, we were giving it away. And we were welcoming everybody. We were providing a kind of refuge from the tumult and madness of the scene. So it was, in that sense, a hospital, and I think a lot of people were helped and maybe even saved. I don't mean only their souls, I mean their minds and bodies were saved because of what was going on in the streets that they just simply couldn't handle. I am talking about overdoses of drugs, people who were pain lost and needed comforting and who sort of wandered or staggered into the temple. Some of them stayed and became devotees, and some just took prasadam and left. Daily, we had unusual incidents, and Swamiji witnessed it and took part in it. The lunch program was his idea.
So, 1 second, Prasanthi. So for Jeremy, we are reading about Prabhupada's Lilamrt, his activities after he came to America, and now his activities in California, San Francisco, how the devotees came together and built the temple, and many people came, and now within a very short period of time, so many initiations took place, and they're cooking and feeding all these people prasadam. So almost 150 to 200 people every day they used to serve prasadam. They built a beautiful community. So Prasant is going to summarize what Haridas is sharing, his reflections, his memories.
So Haridasa was telling this. He was saying that they used to serve it outside. The main food was served inside, but they have taken it outside too. And some of them would eat and leave. And they also saw that most of the stores started selling beads for chanting and also rock records. But their store was different because they are not selling but giving away. And everybody welcomed it because they are helping all the people on the street, feeding them. They are not just helping. They're not. They don't mean only their souls. Both their bodies and minds are being saved because a lot of things happen on the streets like overdoses, drugs, pain. So they are wandering and they got some comfort there. They took prasadam and they used to leave. Um, and the Swamiji also witnessed all these unusual incidents that are happening. And so lunch program was his idea.
Thank you. Vijayanand Prabhu, please read.
Yep. Mukunda, the Salvation Army came in one day for lunch. They just unloaded a whole truckload of people on us, about 30 or 40. Larry Shippen. Some of the community of loose people cynically took advantage of the free food. They did not appreciate the Swami, but they said he was, in his own way, an Orthodox minister, and they were much more interested in being unorthodox. It was a fairly cynical thing. Those who are more interested and had questions, the spiritual seekers, would visit Swamiji in his room. Many of them would come in complete anxiety over the war in Vietnam or what was going on, trouble with the law, bad experience on drugs, a falling out with the school or family. There was much public concern about the huge influx of youth into San Francisco, a situation that was creating an almost uncontrollable social problem. Police and social welfare workers were worried about health problems and poor living conditions, especially in Haight-Ashbury. Some middle-class people feared a complete hippie takeover. The local authorities welcomed the service offered by Swami Bhaktivedanta's temple, and when civic leaders in Haight-Ashbury talked of forming a council to deal with the crisis, they requested Swami Bhaktivedanta to take part. He agreed but lost interest after the first meeting. No one seemed seriously interested in hearing his solution. Okay, so here like Mukunda was mentioning, like several people were coming for the lunch, and it was even Salvation Army. They came for one day for a lunch with a truckload of like 30 and 40 people over there. And Larry Shippen has mentioned that the people among the people who came there, they took the advantage of the free food, but they did not appreciate Swami. And they were saying, because they said like Swamiji was like an orthodox minister, but they were interested more in being unorthodox, so they did not appreciate Swami. And but there are few people who some people who are like more interested and had spiritual questions, and who are like spiritual seekers. They visited Swamiji in his room, and people who are like in complete anxiety over other material things, like war in Vietnam, or with the trouble with the law, or who had bad experience on the drugs, or falling with the school or family. All those people came and seek the association with the Swamiji. And also like the environment over there in San Francisco were like becoming a public concern, because it created an uncontrollable social problem, and the police and the social welfare workers were worried about the poor living conditions and the health problems in Haight-Ashbury. And people also felt that the entire place has been completely took over by hippies, and but the local authorities welcomed Swami Bhaktivedanta's temple, and the people and the civic leaders in that locality, they talked and formed a council to deal with the crisis, and even they requested Swamiji to take part in it. But Swamiji lost interest in it in the first meeting itself, because people are not considering his suggestions and the solution.
Just a minute. Okay, so I can read now. This is we are discussing primarily in 60s, end of the 60s, for Jeremy to update in how the Krishna consciousness grew. People took it and helped in spreading all over the world. That's the subject matter most we are seeing. For everyone, it was a new experience, and they didn't know at all, but learning slowly. Master Subramania. A lot of responsible citizens in San Francisco were very happy that Swami Bhaktivedanta was working amongst the young people. The young people at that time were searching and needed somebody for a very high caliber who could take an interest in them and who would say, you should do this and you should not do that. The consensus was that no one could tell the young people what to do because they were completely out of hand with drugs and so forth. But Swamiji told them what to do, and they did. And everyone was appreciative, especially the young people. Harsarani, just from a medical standpoint, doctors didn't know what to do with people on LSD. The police and the free clinics in the area couldn't handle the overload of people taking LSD. The police saw Swamiji as a certain refuge. Michael Brown, Bhaktivedanta had an amazing ability through devotion to get people off drugs, especially speed. Speed is the name of drug, okay. Especially speed, heroin, burnt out LSD cases, all of that. Haridas, the police used to come with their paddy wagons to the park in the early hours of the morning and pick up runaway teenagers sleeping in the park. The police would round them up and try to send them back home. The hippies needed all the help they could get, and they knew it. And the Radhakrishna temple was certainly a kind of spiritual heaven. Kids sensed it. They were running, living on the streets, no place where they could go, where they could rest, where people weren't going to hurt them. A lot of kids would literally fall into the temple. I think it saved a lot of lives. There might have been a lot of casualties if it hadn't been for Hare Krishna. It was like opening a temple in the battlefield. It was the hardest place to go do it, but it was the place where it was most needed. Although the Swami had no precedence of dealing with any of this, he applied the chanting with miraculous results. The chanting was wonderful, it worked. So this is the miracles has happened. Devotees are sharing. For me, really, when I'm hearing this, reading this is pretty new experience. I can just still think, cannot contemplate fully, but still guess the situations. I wonder why people would leave the house and lie on the street. I have no, I don't understand such miserable condition. And on the other hand, I also see that they won't listen anyone. So at least they found Master Subramania is saying at least people are happy that somebody is addressing this youth who no one would who they will not listen anyone, but they could listen Prabhupada. If you say yes, do this, they would listen. What kind of a special power, spiritual power he had. They were happy, many that they have been addressed, and police is trying to send these people to their homes, and many people needed help. I don't know much thing. So looks like they didn't have food, they didn't have shelter, they were on the I know many of them were worried about the war. They'll be sent to the Vietnam War. But I don't know what other things they had, but why they're so much up into drugs. Yeah, I see many of them are looking for spirituality in the drugs. I don't know where this concept came also. So anyway, but Prabhupada had done miracles there. At least he's addressing these people in need. That's the perfect time. No one was helping, neither they would seek help from anybody, but Prabhupada was there to take care of them. He applied the chanting with miraculous results. The chanting was wonderful and it worked. That's the Haridas is speaking. Ajay, did you read the second time yet? No, I think your turn now. Then.
Okay. Srila Prabhupada knew that only Krishna consciousness could help. Others had their remedies, but Prabhupada considered them mere patchwork. He knew that ignorantly identifying the self with the body was the real cause of suffering. How could someone help himself, what to speak of others, if he didn't know who he was? If he didn't know that the body was only a covering of the real self, the spirit soul, which could be happy only in his original nature as an eternal servant of Krishna? Understanding that Lord Krishna considered anyone who approached him a virtuous person, and that even a little devotional service would never be lost and could save a person at the time of death, Srila Prabhupada had opened his door to everyone, even the most abject runaway. But for a lost soul to fully receive the balm of Krishna consciousness, he would first have to stay a while and chant, inquire, listen, and follow. As Allen Ginsberg had advised 5,000 hippies at the Avalon, the early morning kirtan at the temple provided a vital community service for those who were coming down from LSD and wanted to stabilize their consciousness on reentry. Allen himself sometimes dropped by in the morning with acquaintances with whom he had stayed up all night. Allen Ginsberg. At 6:30 in the morning, we went over to Swami Bhaktivedanta's space station for we went over to Bhaktivedanta's space station for some chanting and a little Krishna consciousness. There were about 30 or 40 people there, all chanting Hare Krishna to this new tune they've made up just for mornings. One kid got a little freaked out by the scene at first, but then he relaxed. And afterwards he told me, at first I thought, what is this? Then suddenly I realized I was just not grooving with where I was. I wasn't being where I was. Prabhupada, they're talking about how Prabhupada knew that no matter how bad off these folks were, Christian consciousness was the only remedy to their problems. Any, there's other ideas, but they were just kind of a quick fix and wouldn't stick. He was saying, hey, in order for them to help themselves and to help others, he would need to first learn that, that the body, that they're not the body, right? That they're spirit, soul, and that, their purpose and their original nature is to serve Krishna. And yeah, and then he talks about how Ginsburg was saying that he kind of advised that going to the morning session was a great place to go after you were tripping your mind out on LSD to come down the right way, right? To come down in the morning and chant and get yourself into a better mind space for to make your re-entry into the world a little easier. And he talks about how I like how they called it a space station, which is kind of fun. But he was saying him and a couple people would go over there for chanting at 6:30 in the morning, and the fellow that he went with started freaking out at first because he was still tripping a little bit, and he's like, I realized I just wasn't grooving where I wasn't being where I was. So he said he just had to accept it. So
Thank you.
On occasion, the re-entries would come flying in out of control for crash landings in the middle of the night. One morning at 2 a.m., the boys sleeping in the storefront were awakened by a pounding at the door, screaming, and police lights. When they opened the door, a young hippie with wild red hair and beard plunged in, crying, "Oh, Krishna, Krishna, who help me? Oh, don't let them get me. Oh, for God's sake, help." A policeman stuck his head in the door and smiled. "We decided to bring him by here," he said, "because we thought maybe you guys could help him." "I'm not comfortable in this body," the boy screamed as the policeman shut the door. The boy began chanting furiously and turned white, sweating profusely in terror. Swamiji's boys spent the rest of the early morning consoling him and chanting with him until the Swami came down for kirtan and class. The devotees often sent distressed young people to Swamiji with their problems, and they allowed almost anyone to see Swamiji and take up his valuable time. While walking around San Francisco, Ravindra Swarup once met a man who claimed to have seen people from Mars in his tent when he had been stationed in Vietnam. The man, who had just been discharged from an army hospital, said that Martians had talked to him. Ravindra Swarupa told him about Swamiji's book, Easy Journey to Other Planets, which verified the idea of life on other planets, and he suggested that the Swami could probably tell him more about the people from Mars. So the man visited the Swami up in his apartment. "Yes," Swamiji answered, "there are Martians." Gradually, Prabhupada's followers became more considerate of the spiritual master and began protecting him from persons they thought might be undesirable. One such undesirable was Rabbit, perhaps the dirtiest hippie in Haight-Ashbury. Rabbit's hair was always disheveled, dirty, and even filled with lice. His clothes were ragged and filthy, and his dirt-caked body stank. He wanted to meet Prabhupada, but the devotees refused. Not wanting to defile Prabhupada's room with Rabbit's nasty, stinking presence. One night after the lecture, however, Rabbit waited outside the temple door. As Prabhupada approached, Rabbit asked, "May I come up and see you?" Prabhupada agreed. So here, basically, sometimes people would come out of nowhere and come to the storefront in the middle of the night. And one day, a hippie with wild red hair was knocking the door and asking for help. And a policeman basically brought him there so that thinking that the devotees could help him. And basically, the Swamiji's boys, they spent the rest of the day morning with him, basically consoling and chanting with him until it was time for the morning kirtan and class. And like devotees often would send like hippies who had problems and were distressed to Swami. And Ravindra Swarupa met a person who claimed that when he was at war in Vietnam, he saw people from Mars. And Ravindra Swarupa mentioned to him about Swamiji's book, Easy Journey to Other Planets, and he suggested that he meet Swamiji. So when he met Swamiji, Swamiji confirmed that yes, there are Martians. And there was one part, like sometimes people would be like Prabhupada's followers would become more affectionate to the spiritual master, and they would protect him. And some hippies, they would consider unfit to meet him. And one such person was Rabbit, who was very dirty. He used to smell an odor, and they didn't want him to go to Prabhupada's apartment. But when the devotees refused, basically Rabbit waited outside the storefront, and one time when he was able to meet Prabhupada outside, he approached and asked him if he could come and see him, and Prabhupada agreed.
It's an interesting name, AJ. Rabbit, I was caught. What is talking about? Rabbit is a real rabbit or person rabbit?
Yeah, probably just a nickname. Some of those guys had crazy nicknames, I guess.
Oh, it's a nickname. Okay.
Gosh, I hope so. I don't do that, or his parents were really mean.
I wish it had been real rabbit, because rabbits are very cute and clean.
Might be.
Prasanti?
As for challengers, almost every night someone would come to argue with Prabhupada. One man came regularly with prepared documents from a philosophy book, from which he would read aloud. Prabhupada would defeat him, and the man would go home, prepare another argument, and come back again with his book. One night, after the man had presented his challenge, Prabhupada simply looked at him without bothering to reply. Prabhupada's neglect was another defeat for the man, and who got up and left. Israel, like Rabbit, was another well-known Haitashpari character. He had a long ponytail and often played the trumpet during Kirtana. After one of Prabhupada's evening lectures, Israel challenged, "This chanting may be nice, but what will it do for the world? What will it do for humanity?" Prabhupada replied, "Are you not in the world? If you like it, why will others not like it? So you chant loudly." The mustached man standing at the back of the room asked, "Are you Allen Ginsberg's guru?" Many of the devotees knew that the question was loaded and that to answer either yes or no would be difficult. Srila Prabhupada replied, "I am nobody's guru. I am everybody's servant." To the devotees, the whole exchange became transcendental due to Swamiji's reply. Swamiji had not simply given a clever response, he had answered out of a deep, natural humility. One morning, a couple attended the lecture, a woman carrying a child and a man wearing a backpack. During the question and answer period, the man asked, "What about my mind?" Prabhupada gave him philosophical replies, but the man kept repeating, "What about my mind? What about my mind?" With a pleading, compassionate look, Prabhupada said, "I have no other medicine. Please chant this Hare Krishna. I have no other explanation. I have no other answer." Many people would come to Prabhupada for challenging him. So one man used to prepare arguments from his philosophy book, and he used to come every day to defeat him. But every time Prabhupada would defeat him. And one time he came, but Prabhupada simply did not answer him, and that was another defeat for the man. And he got up and left. And similarly, Israel, he was also challenging him, saying this chanting is nice, but what can it do for humanity? Then Prabhupada replied that if you like it, others will also like it. Why don't you chant loudly? And and one man asked a question: "Are you Allen Ginsberg's guru?" Then to which Prabhupada replied that he was nobody's guru and everybody's servant. And that was an answer out of deep natural humility. And another person, he was asking, he kept on repeating the question, what about my mind, what about my mind, after Prabhupada gave him many philosophical replies. And then he finally answered, there is no other medicine but to chant Hare Krishna.
Sorry, Nipa, you can read. Nipa? Okay. Vijan and Prabhu, you please read.
But the man kept talking about his mind. Finally, one of the woman devotees interrupted and said, just do what he says, just try it. And Prabhupada picked up his kartals and began kirtana. One evening, a boy burst into a lecture exclaiming that a riot was gathering on Hyde Street. The Swami should come immediately, address the crowd, and calm everyone down. Mukunda explained that it was not necessary for Swamiji to go, others could help. The boy just stared at Prabhupada as if giving an ultimatum. Unless Swamiji came immediately, there would be a riot, and Swamiji would be to blame. Prabhupada spoke as if preparing to do what the boy wanted. Yes, I am prepared. But nobody went, and there was no riot. Usually, during the Kirtana, at least one dancer would carry on in an narcissistic, egoistic way, occasionally becoming lewd to the point where Prabhupada would ask the person to stop. One evening, before Srila Prabhupada had come down from his apartment, a girl in a miniskirt began breathing and grating in the temple during Kirtana. When one of the devotees went upstairs and told Prabhupada, he replied, "That's all right. Let her use her energy for Krishna. I'm coming soon, and I will see for myself." When Prabhupada arrived and started for another Kirtana, the girl, who was very skinny, again began to wriggle and gyrate. Prabhupada opened his eyes and saw her. He frowned and glanced at some of his disciples, indicating his displeasure. Taking the girl aside, one of the women escorted her out. A few minutes later, the girl returned, wearing slacks, and danced in a more reserved style. Prabhupada was sitting on his desk, lecturing to a full house, when a fat girl who had been sitting on the window seat suddenly stood up and began hollering at him. "Are you just going to sit there?" she yelled. "What are you going to do now? Come on, aren't you going to say something? What are you going to do? Who are you?" Her action was so sudden and her speech so violent that no one in the temple responded. Unangered, Prabhupada sat very quietly. He appeared hurt. Only the devotee sitting closest to him heard him say softly, as if to himself, "It is the darkest of darkness." So here we see, like, for the man who was asking question about his mind, since he was not convinced with the answers, so like finally the woman devotees interrupted and said to him, like, just do whatever Prabhupada is saying and just try it. And then Prabhupada started his kirtan. And there was another occasion where a boy just burst into the lecture, claiming that there was an riot happening in the gathering in the Hyde Street, and Swamiji should come and calm everyone down. But Mukunda explained him that it was necessary. It was not necessary for Swamiji to go, but there may be others who can help. But the boy just stared at Prabhupada and giving indication that unless Swamiji is not coming immediately, riot will not stop. But actually, when people went and saw that, there was no riot, and they also did not went actually. And like there is another set of incidents where during the kirtan, at least one dancer would carry an narcissistic, egoistic way of dancing, and Prabhupada would come and ask the person to stop. And there is on one evening before Prabhupada came down from his apartment, a girl in a miniskirt started like breathing and grating in the temple during kirtana, and his devotees came and reported to Prabhupada. And when Prabhupada heard it, he thought, okay, he replied, like, let her use her energy for Krishna. I will come down and see like how she's dancing. And when Prabhupada arrived and started another kirtana, the girl who was there, she again like in a skinny, she started to wriggle and great, and Prabhupada just opened his eyes and like indicated his displeasure, and one of the woman devotee escorted her out, and a few minutes later she gave a girl returned with wearing slacks and like dancing in a reserved style. And there was like another incident where Prabhupada was sitting on the dais and lecturing a full house of people, and there was a fat girl in the sitting at the window seat. She started asking like multiple questions like you are just going to sit there, and what are you going to do now? Are you going to do something, and who are you? All those questions came, and no one answered, and they were silent. And Prabhupada replied very softly that it is the darkest of the darkness.
Wow, Prabhupada had to deal with all these kind of people. Unbelievable. Only those who have gone through, they can know probably. Another night, while Prabhupada was lecturing, a boy came up and sat on the dais beside him. Sat on the dais beside him. Wow. The boy faced out toward the audience and interrupted Prabhupada. I would like to say something now. Prabhupada politely said, wait until after the class, then we have questions. Let me read this. A boy came up and sat on the dais beside him. Suppose the dais is big or something, how he can sit. Then we have questions. The boy waited for a few minutes, still sitting on the dais, and Prabhupada continued the lecture. But again the boy interrupted. I got something to say. I want to say that I have to say now. I want to say what I have to say now. The devotees in the audience looked up astonished, thinking that Swamiji would handle the matter and now not wanting to cause disturbance. None of them did anything. They simply sat while the boy began talking incoherently. Then Prabhupada picked up his kartals. All right, let us have kirtan. The boy sat in the temple, same place throughout the kirtan, looking crazily, sometimes menacingly at Prabhupada. After half an hour, the kirtan stopped. Prabhupada cut an apple into small pieces, as was his custom. He then placed the paring knife and the piece of apple in his right hand and held it hand out to the boy. The boy looked at Prabhupada, then down at the apple and knife. The room became silent. Prabhupada sat motionless, smiling slightly at the boy. After a long, tense moment, the boy reached out. A sigh rose from the audience as the boy chose the piece of apple from Prabhupada's open hand. Haridas, I used to watch how Swamiji would handle things. It wasn't easy. To me, that was a real test of his powers and understanding. How to handle these people. Not to alienate or antagonize or stir them up to create more trouble. He would turn their energy so that before they knew it, they were calm, like when you pat a baby and it stops crying. Swamiji had a way of doing that with words, with the intonation of his voice, with his patience to let them carry on for a certain period of time. Let them work it out, act it out even. I guess he realized that the devotees just won't say, listen when you come to the temple, you can't behave this way. It was a delicate situation there. Often someone would say, I'm God. They would get an insight or hallucination from their drugs. They would try to steal the spotlight. They wanted to be heard, and you could feel an anger against the Swami from people like that. Sometimes they would speak inspired and poetic for a while, but they couldn't sustain it, and their speech would become gibberish. And the Swami was not one to simply pacify people. He wasn't going to coddle them. He would say, what do you mean? If you are God, then you have to be all-knowing. You have to have the attributes of God. Why are you omniscient or omnipotent? He would then name all the characteristics that one would have to be an avatar, to be God. He would rationally prove the person was wrong. He had superior knowledge and he would rationally explain to them, if you are God, can you do this? Do you have this power? So here, in another, the incidents of Prabhupada's patience. A boy would come and sit next to Prabhupada in his dais. I'm surprised how this could happen in this world. And he would interrupt, he would like to say, Prabhupada, so you can wait. But tactically, he made him listen, the whole class looks like. Then he immediately started the kirtan, not giving the person to speak. After kirtan, he sat and as usual, he cut the apple and he extended his hand, looks like to have the apple. So the boy was surprised and in a tense moment, everybody's watching how Prabhupada is dealing. The disciples didn't know how to act. Probably later they become more mature, but they didn't know they cannot. The spiritual master should not be disturbed like this way. So they wouldn't say anything. So Prabhupada also handled in very way. Haridas explains, it was amazing how Swamiji handled the situations. He knew, very well, very patiently, and in a different way he handled this kind of people, crazy people. And you specify whole delicate situations also he could bring under control. One man comes, says, I'm God. So Prabhupada not necessarily keeps quiet all the time. He would say, argue with him. What is the meaning of God? What is the meaning of God? Do you have the God's attributes? Then it takes an advantage on this and explains the attributes of God. So that becomes a preaching opportunity for this. We have 2 more people who can read. Now, Ajay, you can read, please. We'll try to finish today.
Okay. Sometimes people would take it as a challenge and would try to have a verbal battle with the Swami. The audience's attention would then swing to the disturbing individual, the person who was grabbing the spotlight. Sometimes it was difficult. Sometimes it was very difficult. I used to sit there and wonder, how is he going to handle this guy? This one is really a problem. But Swamiji was hard to defeat. Even if he couldn't convince the person, he convinced the other people in the crowd so that the energy of the room would change and would tend to quiet the person. Swamiji would win the audience by showing them that this person didn't know what he was talking about. And the person would feel the vibrations of the room change, that the audience was no longer listening or believing his spiel, and so the person would shut up. Swamiji would remove the audience rather than the person. He would do it without crushing the person. He would do it by superior intelligence, but also with a lot of compassion. When I saw him do these things, then I realized he was a great teacher and a great human being. He had the sensitivity not to injure a person physically or emotionally, so that when the person sat down and shut up, he wouldn't be doing it in defeat or anger. He wouldn't be hurt. He would just be outwitted by the Swami. Even while translating in the privacy of his room, Srila Prabhupada was interrupted by disturbances. Once police cars and ambulances, sirens screaming, lights flashing, converged beneath his window after the Hells Angels had started a fight in the Digger's store in the next building. On another occasion, about 1:30 a.m., while Prabhupada was dictating the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, a girl repeatedly knocked and called at Prabhupada's door. At first, he ignored the interruption. Since his arrival in San Francisco, he had completed many pages for this important book. Lord Chaitanya's discussions with Rupa Goswami and Sanatana Goswami, Ramananda Rai, and others explored many Krishna-conscious topics mentioned only in the Bhagavad Gita. In the West, almost no one knew about these teachings of Lord Chaitanya, and now Srila Prabhupada intended to compile these teachings in one volume, providing the most complete presentation of Bhakti Yoga ever introduced in English. Such a book would give great substance to the Krishna consciousness movement. But now his solitary concentration was being interrupted by a knocking at his door and a woman's voice calling. So it talks about how during Prabhupada's lectures, there would often be not hecklers, but just people that would get up and try to challenge him. And he had a nice way of kind of handling them, not belittling them or not making them feel like defeated or you know, like pushed out or angry. He would just kind of redirect and kind of show them why they were wrong, but in a way that left them not feeling like they were hurt. And then they would kind of just chill out after that, right? They say, okay, yeah, I get it. And the crowd would kind of turn on them, but it sounds like in a way that, you know, they, not in a violent way, just in a kind of way where they're like, okay, yeah, this guy doesn't make any sense. Prabhupada makes sense. And it gets into how he was just constantly dealing with disturbances. You know, even, you know, when he was trying to translate, he'd be sitting in his room doing his translations. He had to deal with the Hells Angels getting into a fight next door and the cops showing up for that. And, you know, a woman just showing up at his house and banging on his door all night, you know, while he was working on the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. And it gets into how that, you know, how the teachings of Lord Chaitanya explored a lot of areas of the Bhagavad Gita that aren't discussed in the West at all. And he was trying to, the way they put it was he was going to put together the most complete presentation of Bhakti Yoga in English, and how important that was to the Krishna consciousness movement. But instead he's dealing with this woman knocking on his door all night.
Okay. Nipa, can you hear me? You want to read? Nipa? Or Cycle Prabhupada?
Getting up from his desk, Prabhupada went to the front room but did not open the door. Who is there? A young woman answered, I want to speak to you. Come back later in the morning, Prabhupada told her. He knew that in San Francisco, just as in New York, he would not always be able to write peacefully. Preaching in America meant having to tolerate just this, a crazy call in the middle of the night, tearing one away from ecstatic concentration on the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya. The lost souls of Hait Ashbury, with their illusions of knowledge, their cries for help, their arrogant challenges, pulled his attention away from his mission of translating and commenting on the scriptures. Now alone in his apartment, speaking to the locked door, Prabhupada told his intruder that he had work to do and that she should go away. He promised he would see her later that day. He was ready to speak with the hippies all day, but the early morning hours were the special time for his literary work. Preaching face to face to the conditioned souls was important. He had come here to preach, but he had picked these early hours to speak intimately to the whole world through his books without disturbance. The girl, however, continued pounding and calling until Prabhupada finally opened the door. There, standing in the hallway, he saw a teenage hippie with a glassy stare and deranged appearance. He asked her what she wanted. She remained tensely silent. Speak, he told her. She stepped into his room. He saw her helpless, a victim in the ocean of Maya, and he asked her repeatedly what she wanted. Finally, the girl stared at him with widened eyes and exclaimed, Look, Maula. Prabhupada decided to awaken Mukunda, who lived down the hall. He stepped barefoot into the hallway. The girl followed, shutting the self-locking door behind her. Now he was locked out of his apartment. She continued to stare at him defiantly in the bare, unfriendly surroundings of a corridor of locked doors at 1 in the morning. This was why the Babajis of Vrindavan stayed in the little cottages chanting the holy name to avoid being bothered by ungodly people. The Babajis, of course, never even dreamed of these bizarre intrusions from the psychedelic San Francisco night. So here, when Prabhupada was doing his translations, he was always getting disturbed, and one such disturbance was basically a woman knocking at like 1:30 or 2 a.m. in the morning and disturbing him. So he didn't open the door and he asked her to go away. And Prabhupada had to deal with all these like all these crazy people, and he wanted his time in the night to write peacefully, so that way it would be helpful for the whole world. He was okay to speak to the hippies all day, but in the early morning, that was for his translation and for writing his books. And the girl still kept on yelling, and Prabhupada finally opened the door, and she basically she basically was still troubling him. And when Prabhupada came out, the door got locked and he was locked out of his apartment because it was self-locking door. And then basically it compares Prabhupada's situation with Babaji's of Vrindavan, where they stayed in the little cottages away from everything and not being disturbed by ungodly people. But here Prabhupada was in the middle of the San Francisco like hippie region, where he was getting disturbed with everyone.
Thank you. So it's 8:43. Thank you so much for joining. I wanted to welcome Jeremy. Jeremy is a long friend of AJ, and we have been meeting at the temple. I will take some time, Jeremy, for pickup, but this is a common language yours. AJ can explain also. Any quick comments, reflections before we wind up? Can we all say? Can we all welcome Jeremy?
I don't want
to. Sorry, I'm unmuting everybody. Jeremy, you're welcome. Everyone say Haribol.
Haribol.
It'll take some time for you to pick up. I know you can pick up very well. Thank you so much for joining. Okay.
Hey, thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me sit back and witness. Thank you.
Yeah. We will connect again tomorrow. Hare Krishna. Shila Prabhupada ki jai.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Good night.
Can't believe you dug this guy up, Krishna.
He's a wonderful man.
I came to him.
Where'd you find this guy, man?
Krishna is in the heart of everyone. He knows that. He's
pretty wild. Yeah, I mean, I was trying to, Jeremy, I was trying to think. I think we've known each other for 20 years.
Nah, 2000. Yeah, 2000. 2000 when I met you in Kennett Square.
Yep, about 20 years, which is crazy. So
now you know what Krishna's plan is.
If Krishna's plan is for me to hang out with Jeremy more, I don't know if that's a good plan.
Yes.
That's a
I don't know
plan.
if it's a good idea, Krishna.
you both has to carry on Krishna's mission now. Help people. I'm so happy to have both of you. It's part also. Hope we all will meet on Sunday. We'll make some plans.
Yep.
That would be great.
Yeah, planning on it. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Hare Krishna. Have a good night.
See ya.
Yeah.